It was a quiet, cold Saturday evening, a few weeks after the divorce papers had been signed and the life I'd known for over 2 decades came to a staggering halt. I was still adjusting to the emptiness, the eerie silence of a home once bustling with weekend laughter and the shared rituals of family. One such tradition was our weekly visit to the bathhouse, a small but cherished escape where my husband, my son Alex, and I would unwind together, reconnecting in the warm, steamy sanctuary. After the divorce, Alex had insisted that we keep up the tradition, just the two of us. At first, I resisted. It felt strange, even sad, to carry on with a ritual so tied to a family unit now fractured. But Alex was adamant, his determination breaking through my hesitations. "Come on, Mom," he had said, his tone light but firm. "It doesn't have to change everything." And so, that evening we packed our things and headed out. The bathhouse wasn't crowded. It rarely was in the winter. The air was heavy with the scent of cedarwood and steam as we entered. It had been a long time since I'd felt this kind of warmth, not just physically but emotionally, like a cocoon against the biting cold of the world outside. Alex had grown so much over the years. At 22, he was no longer the wide-eyed boy who used to splash around in the shallow pool, making waves for fun. He was a man now, tall and composed. His broad shoulders and quiet confidence a reflection of his maturity. And yet, his eyes, kind and familiar, still held the warmth that reminded me of his father. As we settled into one of the private family steam rooms, the space felt intimate but not oppressive. The two of us sat side by side on the wooden bench, wrapped in towels, with a soft hiss of steam enveloping us. "You seem better," Alex said after a moment, breaking the silence. His voice was low, almost tentative. I glanced at him, surprised. "Better? Yeah. Since everything." His eyes flicked to mine, holding them briefly before darting away. "I mean, it's been a tough few months." I took a deep breath, feeling the steam loosen the tension in my shoulders. "I don't know about better. Maybe just adjusting." He nodded, his expression softening. "That's something." For a while we sat in silence, the kind that wasn't uncomfortable but contemplative. The rhythmic hum of the steam calmed my thoughts, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of peace. Alex leaned back, resting his head against the wooden wall, and I found myself marveling at how much he'd grown, not just physically but emotionally. He had been my rock through the divorce, in ways I hadn't anticipated. Quiet, steady, always knowing when to offer support without asking for anything in return. As the minutes passed, I realized how much I valued these moments with him. The world outside could be chaotic and unkind, but here in this little haven, it was just us, two people bound by something deeper than shared blood. "Remember when we used to come here and you'd beg to sit in the sauna for hours?" I said with a small smile, breaking the quiet. Alex laughed, a deep, genuine sound that warmed the room more than the steam. "Yeah, and Dad would always make me leave after 10 minutes because he was convinced I'd overheat. Or because he couldn't handle the heat himself," I teased, and for the first time in months, the mention of my ex-husband didn't sting. We spent the next hour moving between the steam room, the pool, and the lounge area, reminiscing about those simpler times. I was struck by how natural it felt to talk to Alex, how the dynamic between us had shifted subtly over the years. He wasn't just my son. He was a confidant, a partner in navigating this strange, uncharted chapter of life. As the evening wound down, we sat together in the quiet corner of the lounge, sipping tea. Alex reached out, his hand resting lightly on mine. "You'll be okay, you know," he said softly. I blinked back sudden tears, surprised by the depth of emotion in his voice. "You think so?" "I know so," he said, his gaze steady and unwavering. "We both will." For the first time in what felt like forever, I believed him. Over the following weeks, our Saturday evenings at the bathhouse became a comforting constant in a world that had otherwise shifted on its axis. Each visit was like a sacred ritual, a quiet escape from the outside world where everything felt too raw, too uncertain. Here, surrounded by warmth and steam, the silence was never awkward. It was an unspoken understanding, a shared space where words often felt unnecessary. It was during one of those evenings, perhaps the third or fourth since the divorce, that I first noticed how much I had come to look forward to our time together. Not just the relaxation or the solitude, but the way Alex made me feel less alone. His presence was grounding, a steady anchor in a life that sometimes felt adrift. That night, he was already waiting for me by the steam room, his towel draped casually over his shoulders. There was a lightness to him that hadn't always been there. He smiled as I approached, and I couldn't help but smile back, the familiar sight of him bringing a warmth that had nothing to do with the bathhouse. "You're late," he teased, opening the door to let me in. I rolled my eyes, brushing past him with a smirk. "I'm the one who drives you here, remember? If I'm late, it's your fault too." He laughed, a sound that echoed softly in the wooden chamber as we settled onto the benches. The steam was already swirling around us, curling in thick tendrils that softened the edges of the world. Alex leaned back, his head resting against the wall, and for a moment, I allowed myself to just look at him. It wasn't that I hadn't noticed before, but something about the intimacy of these evenings had sharpened my awareness of him. The way his shoulders filled the space next to me, the quiet strength in his posture. There was a maturity to him now, a quiet self-assurance that made him seem older than his years. "You okay, Mom?" he asked, catching me mid-thought. His eyes were kind, filled with the same concern that had carried me through so many difficult days. I nodded quickly, brushing a strand of damp hair from my face. "Course. Just thinking." "About what?" "About how much I enjoy these nights with you," I said honestly, the words tumbling out before I had a chance to overthink them. "It's nice having this time together." He smiled, and there was something in his expression, something warm and unguarded, that made my chest tighten. "Yeah," he said softly. "It is." The air between us felt heavier after that, though not in a way that was uncomfortable. It was simply charged, as though some unspoken truth hung in the space between us, waiting to be acknowledged. I didn't know what to make of it, didn't know if it was all in my head or if Alex felt it too. That night, as we moved between the steam room and the plunge pool, I found myself noticing little things. The way his eyes lingered on me when he thought I wasn't looking. The way his hand brushed mine when he passed me a towel, the touch lingering just a second longer than it needed to. I told myself I was imagining things. He was my son after all. But even as I tried to convince myself, I couldn't shake the feeling that something between us was shifting, evolving into something I didn't quite understand. By the time our next visit rolled around, I found myself looking forward to it in a way that felt different. There was an anticipation that hadn't been there before, a quiet excitement that I tried to ignore but couldn't entirely suppress. Alex seemed to feel it too. There was a lightness in his step as we entered the bathhouse, an eagerness in the way he led the way to our favorite steam room. As we settled in, the familiar warmth enveloping us, I couldn't help but feel grateful for these moments. The world outside was cold and uncertain, but here it was just us. The steam wrapped around us like a cocoon, and for a while, nothing else mattered. We talked more that night than we usually did, the conversation flowing easily between memories of the past and dreams for the future. He told me about his plans for work, the things he wanted to accomplish. I listened, captivated by the quiet passion in his voice, the way his eyes lit up when he spoke about the things he cared about. "You're amazing, you know that?" I said suddenly, the words spilling out before I could stop them. Alex blinked, his expression softening. "Mom." "No, really," I insisted. "I don't think I tell you that enough. You're such a good man, Alex. Your father and I couldn't have asked for a better son." His gaze met mine, and for a moment, the air between us felt impossibly still. "You're pretty amazing too, you know," he said quietly. "You've been through so much, and you're still here." The way he said it, the way his voice dipped just slightly on that last word, sent a shiver through me that had nothing to do with the cool air outside the steam room. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words caught in my throat, and all I could do was nod. Later that evening, as we sat together in the lounge, sipping tea and wrapped in fluffy robes, I felt a strange sense of contentment settle over me. Alex was watching me, his expression unreadable, and for a moment I wondered what he was thinking. "You know," he said suddenly, his voice breaking the quiet, "I don't think I've ever felt closer to you than I do right now." I looked at him, startled by the vulnerability in his tone. "Alex, I mean it," he continued, his gaze unwavering. "These past few weeks. It's been hard, yeah. But it's also been good. Being with you like this. It's like," he hesitated, searching for the right words. "It's like I'm finally seeing you for who you really are." I didn't know what to say to that. All I knew was that something in his words, in the way he was looking at me, was changing everything. The boundaries between us, once so clear and defined, had begun to blur. And for the first time I wasn't sure how I felt about that. The following Saturday, the air between us carried an unmistakable weight, a mixture of anticipation and something deeper that neither of us dared to name. Alex greeted me at the door, his easy smile a little softer, his eyes lingering just a moment longer than usual. There was an energy between us that I couldn't deny, though I told myself again and again that it was nothing. Just a mother and her son, navigating the new closeness that had grown between them. At the bathhouse, things felt different. As we settled into our usual routine of the steam room and plunge pool, Alex seemed quieter, more thoughtful. It wasn't until we were seated in the lounge with cups of tea that he broke the silence. "Hey," he said, his tone light but curious. "Have you ever had a massage here?" I looked at him over the rim of my cup, surprised. "No, I haven't." "Why?" He shrugged, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "I was just thinking. It might be nice. You've seemed a little tense lately." I raised an eyebrow, though his observation wasn't wrong. The weight of the divorce, the upheaval of our lives, it was all still there, lingering beneath the surface. "Tense, huh?" He chuckled. "You deserve to relax, Mom. Let me book you one." I waved him off. "Alex, you don't need to. I insist." His tone was playful, but his eyes held a seriousness that made me pause. "Really? Let me do this for you." Before I could protest further, he was already at the counter, speaking to the receptionist. When he returned, his grin was triumphant. "You're all set, but—" He hesitated, his grin turning sheepish. "I kind of booked one for myself too." I laughed, shaking my head. "Of course you did." The massage was heavenly, every knot of tension in my back and shoulders melting away under the therapist's skilled hands. By the time it was over, I felt lighter, my body relaxed in a way it hadn't been in years. Alex met me in the lounge afterward, his expression blissful. "Well," he asked, tilting his head as he studied me. "How do you feel?" "Like I could float out of here," I admitted, earning a laugh from him. "Good." That was the goal. Later that evening, as we lingered in one of the smaller steam rooms, Alex stretched out on the bench beside me, his movements slow and languid from the massage. I glanced at him, noting the easy way he held himself, the quiet contentment in his expression. "You know," I said, breaking the silence, "you're right. That was exactly what I needed." "See?" He grinned, his eyes glinting with mischief. "I know what's good for you, Mom." I nudged him lightly with my elbow, though his words warmed me in a way I didn't entirely understand. "Maybe I should return the favor," I said, half joking. "Give you a massage sometime." He raised an eyebrow, his grin softening. "You offering?" I hesitated, though there was no reason for the sudden flutter in my chest. Why not? Fair's fair, right?" Alex sat up, his gaze suddenly more focused. "You don't have to, you know. I just wanted you to relax tonight." "I know." I smiled at him, the warmth of the room making the moment feel strangely intimate. "But I want to. You've done so much for me these past few weeks. It's the least I can do." Back at home, the atmosphere was quieter but no less charged. Alex had taken my offer seriously, and now he was lying face down on the couch, his broad back bared as I carefully worked the tension from his shoulders. My hands moved tentatively at first, unsure of how much pressure to apply, but as he hummed in approval, I grew bolder. "Where'd you learn how to do this?" he asked, his voice muffled by the cushion beneath him. "I didn't," I admitted with a laugh. "I'm just guessing." "Well, your guesses are pretty good." He let out a deep sigh, his muscles softening under my touch. "You're a natural." Something about the way he said it, his voice low and almost reverent, sent a shiver through me. I tried to ignore it, focusing instead on the knots beneath my fingertips, but the closeness of the moment made it difficult. "Does this help?" I asked after a while, my voice quieter than I intended. He turned his head slightly, just enough to meet my eyes. "Yeah," he said softly. "It helps a lot." For a moment, the room felt impossibly still, the only sound the quiet hum of the heater in the corner. I didn't know what to say, didn't know how to respond to the way his gaze lingered, heavy with something unspoken. "Okay," I said finally, breaking the silence as I pulled my hands away. "I think that's enough for one night." Alex sat up slowly, his movements deliberate as he stretched. "Thanks, Mom," he said, his voice warm. "Really?" The next week at the bathhouse, the tension between us was palpable, though neither of us acknowledged it. It was there in the way his eyes lingered on me, in the way his hand brushed against mine as he passed me a towel. I told myself it was nothing, that I was imagining things, but the heat that rose in my chest each time he looked at me said otherwise. After our usual rounds of the steam room and plunge pool, we found ourselves in the massage lounge again. This time, Alex didn't suggest booking another appointment. "You know," he said casually, leaning back in his chair, "I think I'd rather have another one of your massages." His words caught me off guard, though I tried to hide it. "Oh, really?" "Yeah." His gaze was steady, unflinching. "You're better than the professionals, anyway." I laughed, though the sound felt too loud in the quiet room. "Flattery will get you everywhere, Alex." He grinned, his expression softening. "Good to know." Later that night, as I lay in bed replaying the events of the evening, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed between us. The lines that once seemed so clear were blurring, and for the first time I wasn't sure how to navigate them. But I did know one thing. I was looking forward to next Saturday more than I cared to admit. The following Saturday I was running a little behind. A work email had delayed me, and I rushed downstairs to find Alex waiting for me by the front door. I stopped short when I saw him, the air leaving my lungs in a soft, startled exhale. He was holding flowers. "Alex," I said, blinking at the bouquet in his hands. It was a mix of white lilies and soft pink roses, elegant and understated, but utterly beautiful. "What's this?" He shrugged, his expression almost shy. "I just thought you deserved them. You've been amazing lately, Mom. I wanted to do something nice for you." My heart swelled at his words, my throat tightening as I took the bouquet from him. "You didn't have to do this," I murmured, though my smile betrayed how much the gesture meant to me. "I wanted to," he said simply, his eyes meeting mine with an openness that made my chest ache. "You've been through so much and you're still, you." I didn't know what to say. My fingers brushed over the delicate petals as I tried to find the words, but none of them felt adequate. So instead, I set the flowers on the counter and turned back to him, wrapping my arms around his shoulders in a hug that was both spontaneous and instinctive. "Thank you," I whispered against his chest, my voice barely audible. "This means so much." His arms tightened around me, his warmth wrapping around me in a way that felt protective, grounding. For a long moment we just stood there, neither of us speaking. Then he leaned back slightly, just enough to press a kiss to my cheek. The gesture was gentle, lingering, and it left a warmth behind that had nothing to do with the steam room we were about to visit. "Any time," he said softly, his voice low and steady. That evening, as we walked into the bathhouse together, I couldn't help but feel the difference in the air between us. There was a closeness now that hadn't been there before, a quiet understanding that made every glance, every brush of his hand against mine, feel heavier. We moved through our usual routine, but everything felt more deliberate. The steam room seemed quieter, the air thicker with something unspoken. Even the water of the plunge pool felt warmer, as though it carried the remnants of whatever tension simmered between us. At one point, as we sat together in the lounge sipping tea, Alex reached out, his hand brushing lightly against mine. It was a small gesture, but it sent a shiver through me nonetheless. "You know," he said, breaking the silence, "these Saturdays are the best part of my week." I looked at him, startled by the quiet intensity in his voice. "They are." He nodded, his eyes meeting mine. I know they started as a way to keep things normal after everything. But now," he hesitated, his gaze dropping to his hands. "Now they're just important to me." His words hung in the air between us, heavy with meaning. I didn't know how to respond, didn't know what to do with the warmth spreading through my chest. So I simply nodded, my voice barely above a whisper as I said, "They're important to me too." Later that night, as we were getting ready to leave, Alex pulled me aside near the entrance. The bathhouse was quiet now, most of the other patrons having left for the evening. The dim light cast long shadows across the walls, the space feeling more intimate than ever. "Hey," he said softly, his hand brushing against my arm. "I've been meaning to ask. How are you?" "Really?" The question caught me off guard. "I'm fine," I said automatically, though the words felt hollow even as I spoke them. "Are you?" he pressed, his eyes searching mine. "Because it's okay if you're not. I want you to know I'm here for you. Always." The sincerity in his voice, the quiet determination in his gaze. It was overwhelming. I felt a lump form in my throat as I nodded, unable to trust myself to speak. "Come here," he said, his voice so gentle it nearly undid me. Before I could respond, he pulled me into another hug, his arms wrapping around me with a tenderness that made my chest ache. His hand rested lightly against the back of my head, his fingers threading gently through my hair as he held me close. I let myself relax into the embrace, my cheek pressing against his chest as I closed my eyes. "You're amazing," he murmured, his voice so quiet I barely heard it. "I hope you know that." My heart raced, my thoughts a whirlwind of emotions I couldn't quite untangle. When he finally pulled back, his hands rested lightly on my shoulders, his gaze holding mine with an intensity that made it impossible to look away. And then he leaned in, pressing another kiss to my cheek. This one lingered a moment longer than it should have, the warmth of his lips sending a shiver down my spine. "Good night, Mom," he said softly, his voice low and steady. I watched him walk away, my heart pounding in my chest as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. The boundaries between us had always been clear, but now they felt blurred, shifting in ways I wasn't sure I understood. Over the next week, Alex's gesture stayed with me. Every time I saw the flowers on the counter, their petals soft and vibrant, I was reminded of his words, of the way his arms had felt around me, the warmth of his kiss on my cheek. It was all so innocent, so simple, and yet it wasn't. When Saturday finally arrived again, I found myself filled with equal parts anticipation and trepidation. I didn't know what to expect, didn't know how to navigate the growing closeness between us. But as Alex greeted me at the door, his smile soft and his eyes warm, I felt myself relax despite my uncertainties. "Ready?" he asked, his voice light but tinged with something deeper. I nodded, returning his smile as I reached for my bag. "Always."